welcome to the Irocknits podcast, coming to you from Victoria, Minnesota, a suburb of the Twin Cities. I live in the southwest corner of Minneapolis area, and today I have so much to talk to you about. I was thinking, I don't have a lot of knitting that I can show, and I started gathering things together today for the podcast, and I couldn't believe how much we have. So we're into October, we've had the harvest moon, and I'm going to get another podcast up here on a Tuesday afternoon. So we're going to start today with Cori's stories. I have a little tale to tell. About 3 weeks ago, I had my 3-month checkup for my left knee replacement at the doctor, and I got the all clear to move forward with my daily activity as I could tolerate, and he didn't need to see me again for my 1-year anniversary. And I have been riding my bike in the neighborhood to build up some strength in my legs. And I usually ride on a really low gear and just kind of go slow and keep it going. So I do a big loop of my neighborhood here. And I fell off my bicycle and fell onto my left knee, which is the side that my replacement was on. And I opened my incision, which had been completely closed. It was gruesome and horrifying, traumatizing to me. A couple of dogs came running and hit me, not in a bad way. It was just a fluke thing, and I wasn't prepared for it. It was a little damp in the roads, and I just went down. I didn't really slide, but I laid in the street with my bike on me, and an older gentleman was walking, and he was trying to run to get to me, and I just kept saying, I broke my knee. I think I broke my knee. I was so scared that I had done some serious damage to that new knee. So I asked the man to call, and the funny thing about having cell phones these days is that we absolutely, I'm bumping the table again, we absolutely can't remember any phone numbers because they're all in our phones. So the only people that I could get a hold of were my husband at work, my daughter in Iowa, and my parents in South Dakota, because those are the numbers that I know. My 2 friends who I needed to get a hold of so that they could maybe come and get my dog who was there and take him so that I could go to the hospital or call 911 or whatever. I didn't know their numbers to call them. And eventually a young girl came out of the house that I was in front of, and she brought me a cell phone charger because my phone was in my pocket, but it was dead, and this gentleman's phone was dying. It was just kind of it was a bad situation. And she put me in the back of her car with my dog and brought me home. Eventually we figured out that I could bear weight and that I probably hadn't broken the knee, but that it was bleeding. And so I went into TRIA, where my doctor is, and checked myself into urgent care there, and thinking that perhaps I could get a hold of the nurse upstairs who I'd called on the way, if they could, look at the x-rays. I assumed that I would have to have a whole battery of some tests done, and if my doctor was in, perhaps he could take a look at it. And they came down and got me right away and took me up to his office, and I did not damage the knee, which a titanium knee is not going to break, but the bones around it could have broken. And so they put me back together and cleaned out the wound and put me in a leg immobilizer for 4 days. He did not want me to bend that knee to put any pressure on that incision to have it keep popping open. And so I had to sleep in a leg immobilizer, and I got really down. I was really down on myself when I was there. I kept saying to the nurse, I feel so stupid. And she said to me, Cori, this is an orthopedic center. We see people who fall off their bikes every day. And so, they put a little bit of my fears to rest, that I wasn't just a stupid older woman out riding her bicycle and couldn't keep it under control. So anyway, I got a little down and had a couple of days in the recliner, just knitting and sitting with my yarn in my lap and feeling bad that I had kind of undone some of the work that I had done to strengthen that knee, because now it needed to be immobilized for a while. But I'm happy to say that I had a checkup a week later, which was last Tuesday, and everything looks great. They redressed the incision. I'd only opened it a short amount of the incision is this long, but I'd only opened it for about this much of the, so they redressed it, and he said it'll probably kind of, what's the word? Drain. Sorry, it's too much information. I'll stop. For a couple more days, and it's much better, and I'm bending much better, and I went downstairs the last couple of days, and I've been able to go step over step again, so luckily I did not hurt it any worse than that. But anyway, I wanted to get that out of the way, and I know a few of you already know about it because I've been in touch with some people, and people have been checking in on me to see if I was recuperating okay, but we will just leave it at that you got to just be careful. You got to be so careful, and accidents can happen to anybody. So I want to touch briefly on something that I said last week. Someone made a comment on the Ravelry boards that after last week, I talked a little bit about problems with patterns and getting information from patterns and gauge. And we have been talking about ease and different sweaters, and her comment was, I think you said that having a sweater with a problem in it isn't necessarily my fault. And I wanted to say, absolutely, just because you knit a sweater that does not turn out the way that you thought it would, and the fit doesn't turn out the way you thought it would, is not necessarily your fault. There are issues that we can have with the yarns we're using, with the patterns we're using, with the way we might interpret a pattern that can definitely lead to a problem or failure. But I just thought it was really, she wanted to just kind of be like, wow, I don't necessarily have to be responsible for all parts of why this didn't turn out. So I just wanted to say, absolutely, that's very true. You don't necessarily have to have the burden on your shoulders any longer. And we're going to work through some more of those things, so maybe we can clear up a few more problems that people might be having. So I saw this on the internet a while ago, and it came up in my Time Hop app, so I'm going to share it with everybody here. This is a picture of yarn that has been reskeined. And I think when we look at different skeins of yarn, like these that are so variegated, we look at them and they look beautiful, and we really like them. And sometimes when we get them home, when we put them on the ball winder or we skein them up by hand, we're not as fond of the colorway. And that is the dilemma for yarn dyers in the industry right now, is whether or not they should take a skein after they've dyed it and reskein it up. So if they dyed in 3 sections, let's say red, yellow, blue, and they hank it up into a skein, and you see a big section of red and a big section of yellow and a big section of blue, and you love that, and then you reskein the skein into a ball, you're going to have short little sections of red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, blue, red, yellow, blue. And it's really hard to know how that is going to knit up for you. So sometimes you might want to purchase a skein of yarn and reskein it and see what the distribution looks like before you knit with it. And sometimes there are yarn dyers out there now who reskein all of their yarn. And so you can just ask. Mostly, a lot of times you can tell. And here is a picture example of reskeined yarn. And look at the difference between the skeins on the right and the skeins on the left. They're the same skein of yarn. Look at that middle one with the red, yellow, and green on the outside. I'd totally buy that. With the brown and the darker green and the yellow on the inside, not so much. I wouldn't be drawn to that at all. So I think, and there are lots of interest. Okay, folks, I am having a little trouble with my iPad. My storage is full, and it was last time I did this video thing. And so I have been trying to manipulate it by getting things off of it, and now today again it is full, and so I'm going to switch to my phone and see if I can record the rest of this podcast on my phone. And so the view is going to change a little bit here for you, but I have indeed decided that I will buy a new iPad with more memory, but I'm not going to run out and do it today. So I'm going to try to get through this. So here's where we were. I was showing you the differences between the reskeined and the original skeins on this picture. Look at that one on the right in the center. I would totally buy that skein. But on, this one, look, red, yellow, green. Over here, it's completely different and not nearly as appealing to me if I'm in the marketplace for a yarn skein. So that's the thing. You have to make a decision about whether or not you like the yarn before it's skeined up. And it can just really change the entire look of a skein of the yarn that you're getting. So I can't really recommend a good answer for some of you who have never heard of this or didn't realize, but that you get home and you've bought this beautiful skein of yarn and it just doesn't look the same once you reskein it. So it's just something to be aware of, I think, and also to perhaps talk to the yarn dyer that you're purchasing it from. Occasionally you're at a marketplace where there's a ball winder and you can go over and wind a skein, purchase a skein, wind it, come back and say, yep, this is exactly what I was looking for. In other instances, you don't have that option, and it's just something that since there are more and more yarn dyers out there doing variegated yarns or self-striping yarns, it's really hard to know what the colored repeats look like unless they have photographs of it. Maybe they've got a photograph of it on their phone that they took a picture after reskeining. That would be an option. But wouldn't that be nice if they all came with a picture of what they're going to look like? Okay, so anyway, the first thing that we're going to talk about in projects today is a new pattern that I have that went live at the Minnesota Knitters Guild Knitting Retreat at the end of September, and it is done with lavender loom yarns. And it was a mini skein set that I designed this cowl for. And it's called the Winter Sunset Cowl, and Lavender Loom did Winter Sunset mini skeins. And this really does look like the image. If you go out to the Ravelry page and you take a look at the image that's out there, it really is the snow, some birch trees, especially that top color, which is the birch trees, and then lavender blue, kind of a pale pink and gray. I have a picture of it from the pattern. So here's the pattern page, the Winter Sunset Cowl. There it is on, beautiful Joanna, my model. And then we took a couple of other shots of that. These are just printed off my home computer, so the color isn't super true on, regular paper, but here she is showing it off in all of its glory with her purple hair that turned pink. So that went live at the Knitting Retreat the end of September and is now up for sale on Ravelry. I'm looking at the wrong spot because of the camera. If you are a member of the Minnesota Knitters Guild, on their website, all these patterns are available for free because you're a member. And so when I won a contest with them a year ago for the wrap that I did, that pattern is up there. And then this pattern, when I won the contest that they had to design a cowl out of these mini skeins, that is also out there. So they have a kind of a general area for free patterns that you can get if you're a member of the Minnesota Knitters Guild. You don't have to go out to Ravelry and purchase these patterns, but this is just a simple horseshoe lace with a repeating rows of the lavender in between. Now, I got in touch with Samantha at Lavender Loom and asked her whether or not she will still be dyeing this colorway or if it was exclusive to the retreat, and I haven't heard back from her yet, but she has some mini skeins sets out in her shop right now at Lavender Loom. She's got a website and she's got mini skeins, so you could probably find something if you didn't have anything already in your stash. But this would be a great use up some minis or partial skeins that you have left over and it's knit from the bottom up, just like that. So five mini skeins in that That is Winter Sunset Cowl, and the little quote that goes at the beginning, you know how I always have a little bit of, is winter is the time for comfort, for good food and warmth, for the touch of a friendly hand, and for a talk beside the fire. It is the time for a home, by Edith Sitwell. And I think that's so true. Winter, right? Knitting by the fire in the wintertime with and making warm things to keep us warm. It's been so cold here in Minnesota the last week. It's rainy and cold, which we're used to cold, right? We know winter is coming. But it's just been so damp, and we've just had rain for every day. Okay, another new pattern that came out recently that I wanted to share with people is my Mr. Tom's Field socks. And I have my little shoe form here, and I'm hoping that you can all see. But this has a diamond motif on the front of it. And the story that I wrote for the beginning of these socks was about Mr. Tom's Field. When I was growing up, the lot across the street from my house was empty. There had been no houses built there, and we used to play in that gigantic lot. It was probably 2 houses long and 2 houses deep. They've since put a residential home for handicapped adults there, and it's a beautiful brick, large building. But we had this entire field all to ourselves, and we played in the tall grasses. Sometimes my dad would go over and mow us a place to play kickball, and that's where the idea for these socks came, is that you've got this diamond and all of the radiating diamonds that go out, and they're just pearl stitches from Mr. Tom's Field, a childhood memory of playing kickball or softball or any type of game on a diamond. You know, you used to make up games to play depending on how many players you had, and it didn't really matter. I say in this that girls and boys were equal members of the team, and the more kids playing, the better, and the bossiest one probably got to play pitcher, right? Sometimes that was me. I was maybe not the bossiest, but I could be loud. So this is knit up in the colorway. Which one is this? Ancient Arts Yarns out of Canada has colorways named for cats and dogs, and they give a proceed of their the proceeds of selling these skeins of yarn to animal shelter and rescue. And so I really wanted to use yarns from that particular company because it also is a love of mine from my childhood, is having dogs growing up, and many of you had cats growing up. And so I just really loved that. Ancient Arts Yarns, their Meow yarn collection and their Wolf yarn collection. And one of these is the Golden Retriever colorway, and the other is the Abyssinian Cat colorway. I'll show you the other one. Here's the other one I have on a sock blocker. This is on my daughter's size sock blocker. You can't see that diamond as well from the top on a sock blocker, but I do have her pair that if she gets a pair, these will be hers because these is the size that fits her. And then I have the original prototype because you do not, absolutely do not have to do these socks in the Ancient Arts Yarns out of Canada. But the original prototype, which did not show up very well, but I think is a real kind of what we're talking about today, is what will the yarn do when you actually knit it up, is that this has the diamond pattern on it, but you can't see it very well, right? It really gets muddled in all of the, sorry, got a text message. It gets muddled in all of the variegation that's going on here, and then you got this weird striping over the cuff, and on the other one it happened all the way through. So although I was working out the pattern, and that's fine with me, and I can still wear these as socks, we didn't use these for any of the photography because we really needed to use something that was a little more. So I would not recommend a highly variegated or self-striping yarn unless it was very solid and tonal, and then you would get to see the diamond from Mr. Tom's Field. And I know that I have friends from my childhood who I would bring up the comment of, remember Mr. Tom's Field? And those people would say that. So we took the picture outside Joanna's feet with rubber balls for playing kickball, and we used different colors of balls to take those pictures. So that was a new pattern that came out for me. I don't have a lot of sock patterns. I'm not a huge sock knitter. I have knit a lot of socks, but I'm not a huge sock knitter. There's a difference, right? Like I knit socks because they're easy and they're travel and they're on the go. But if I sit down in my chair and I have a choice, I'll always pick the garment to knit before I'll pick up my socks. The socks are mostly out of the house knitting, far more likely. Okay, and then the last design I have to show you today that is not part of Sweater Talk is my Phases shawl that came out at ZK this year out of 3 Irish Girls yarn, and I got the second sample from them this week. So I'm having a photo shoot tomorrow for some new patterns that I have coming out, and I'm going to do the photo shoot with the gal who takes my pictures and Joanna, and I didn't have a picture of the second colorway, and so once you see what we've done with this, then you'll understand why I got the sample from them, so we can take another picture tomorrow during that photo shoot time, and then I'll add it to Ravelry. So this is my Phases shawl, and it's a large rectangle with holes at the shoulders so that you can put your arms through it in order to put it on. Very easy to knit, big, huge rectangle. And you can also wear it like this. You wrap it around your neck and then put the tail end of the shawl through the hole. It's perfect for under a winter coat because you can wrap it around your neck, have your coat on, it all hangs down, it's nice and cozy, and then when you get somewhere, let's say you're going to a dress up occasion, then you can take off your coat, take the shawl or the scarf off and make it into the shawl by putting your arms through the sleeves. So you don't have that shawl distress. You know what I'm talking about? You've got a really cute shawl on or a big kind of collared cowl, and it's down over your shoulders, and you go to put your coat on, your winter coat on or your fall coat, and you can't wear it like that. So it's so frustrating because then you have to wrap it up around your neck. So this is perfect for that. So this is the original design that I did, and it was done out of 3 skeins and a partial of 3 Irish Girls. So one side is the dark blue, and the reason that I chose their yarn, and then the center section is mohair, and they have a heavier weight mohair. This is not lace weight. This is more of a fingering, definitely a fingering weight with some sparkle in it. And so their colorways are called, whoops, wrong sheet, Fly Me to the Moon, Maleficent, and When Doves Cry in the 3 Irish Girls. And so we were doing a theme on the moon and the Phases moon, and I really liked that they had the Fly Me to the Moon colorway. And this is just an open mesh section. And then where you, let me see if I can put this on my shoulder here, where you do the divide for the sleeves, you're actually making a welt in here out of a coordinating color. So in this case, we used the gray. And then you come across and then you break and you do the welt on one side and the welt on the other side, which is the reinforcement for where your arm comes through at your shoulder. And then you continue on and go across with the welt. So it starts with a gray at the bottom, 1 skein of fingering, 2 skeins of their mohair, another skein of fingering, and then the welt at the bottom. That one was pictured because I had it and before ZK, and the second one was knit by a sample knitter for me. One of my best sample knitters. She's brilliant and fast, and she's a great test knitter because she catches all my little mistakes. She brought this with her to ZK, and so we didn't have it beforehand. And this is the light side of the moon colorway. So we had the dark side of the moon and the light side of the moon. So here we go. We have a lavender on the edge, and then we have this beautiful cream and blue. We've got cream in the mesh, and then on the other side, we've got this beautiful gray with the lavender, and then it ends off with lavender too. So we'll be taking a picture of that one, and it sits up really nice on your shoulder. Here's another picture of Joanna wearing it pulled around to the front. She pulled it all the way over her shoulders and around to the front so we could really get the two colors pictured in that one. But it just really can come up over your shoulders and drape on your shoulders, and those arm openings are plenty big for anyone's shoulder opening to fit into that. And so that's my Phases shawl that came out at ZK, and it is kitted and available on the 3 Irish Girls website in both the dark side of the moon and the light side of the moon colorways. So you can go to their website and they have kits available for that particular shawl, which is great. It's a great shawl for a wedding. It's lightweight, but if you're going to a wedding in the summer or the winter and it's going to be air conditioned, or you're uncertain about the temperature and you've got on a cute little dress and you need something to wrap over your shoulders so you don't have to wear your husband's coat, because how many of us have done that before, right? We get somewhere and we're freezing and then we have to put on our husband's jacket, and so we look like a linebacker. This is a great shawl for that. And like I said, it's rectangular, so there's not any shaping. Once you figure out what the pattern rows are, which there's not a lot of patterning in it, it's a 4-row repeat, and you knit, purl, knit for the first 3 rows. So not difficult at all. The 4th row has got knit 1, purl 1. I think that's all it's made up to be. Super simple to do. Just gives you some texture. So you have the fun with the welts, and then it's very mindless knitting, and I would say television knitting or running about town knitting, because you're just going back and forth on the rectangular piece. But this one is just, I think, stunning. Very, very rich, and we will be taking pictures of that light side of the moon one tomorrow afternoon in the rain. So I'm hoping we're going to be indoors at the library for one of the shots, and then I'm hoping we can step outside and get really good outdoor pictures for that one. And so there we go. We've talked about the winter sunset cowl, the socks, and then the Phases shawl. So I have a question to answer from a viewer this week, and I've got quite a bit to say about it. So I'm going to talk a bit about a question from Tay80, and she asked me on the Ravelry thread what she can do if she knits too tight. And she said, you know, it's a real problem. It's a real struggle for her, and she's worked on it in different ways. And so I thought, you know, this isn't the first time that I've had someone struggle with that, or too loosely, which is just the opposite conundrum that someone might have. So I have some tips and tricks and things that when I teach beginning knitting that I talk to knitters about. And so I've got some notes here, and we're going to go over quickly. For Tay80, thanks for asking. It's a great question. My first question is what is your tension? How do you tension your yarn? Are you tensioning your yarn around your pinky finger? Are you tensioning your yarn in between your fingers? Are you knitting continental, or are you picking with your left hand? Or are you knitting continental with your left hand, or are you throwing with your right hand? Because all of those things can factor into how you are getting the stitches on the needle. Are you knitting close to the tip of your knitting needle? The tip of your knitting needle is the smaller circumference, and then it widens out to the larger part. And what I often find is people who are knitting on the tips of their knitting needles and not pushing the yarn up to the fatter part are tight knitters. And that's very common in my beginning knitter class. They're knitting and they're wrapping it around the tip, and then they're sliding it over, and then they're going to the next stitch, and they're leaving that piece of yarn around the tip end of the needle. And that, I don't know that that's a common problem with a more experienced knitter, but with my beginner knitters, they're not moving the yarn up to the fattest part of the needle. And so you have to tell them to move the needle through further before they do the wrap. So if you're knitting on your tips, that could be one problem you might be having. Another one is the distance between the stitches when you are knitting. If you have your stitches side by side by side by side, and they never spread out from one another, that can also cause your tension to become quite tight. So just like when you're knitting color work and you kind of want to knit a couple stitches and move those stitches down a little, leave some space in between those needles. if you have good tension, you don't have to worry about spacing between your stitches on the needle. But if your stitches are all butted up side by side to each other and your knitting is too tight, leaving some space in between each one of those stitches when you move it down the needle can help you to loosen up your knitting, because it will provide some more yarn in between those two stitches to cause some looseness to happen there. Another thing that I find with my new knitters and with some knitters that I see in public sometimes is that their posture is also affecting the way that they knit. So we can get like this a little bit. We can get to looking too closely at our knitting, and we can get a little hunched in our shoulders and looking down very far instead of relaxing our shoulders down and perhaps holding our knitting out a little bit further away from us. That can help you to just relax the entire thing into semblance of having looser stitches on the needle. I don't know you well enough to answer this specifically for you, but if you've been knitting tightly, let's say for a number of years, you've practiced that. You've practiced it over and over and over again. And so it can be really hard to break that because it's a habit. You are going to have to practice knitting loosely for a long period of time. You're going to have to practice it over and over again in order to train your fingers. Your fingers and your brain are taking over if you've been knitting for any time at all. And so you need to really figure out where you are at with how long you have been knitting that tightly. Another problem is how tight are you casting on? If your cast on row is really tight and then you say to yourself, well, it gets a little better after my cast on row, that can be the problem. That cast on row being too tight and being really hard to get into those first few stitches, especially for new knitters. Oh my gosh, they're trying so hard to shove that through, and then their stitches are splitting and the stitches are so tight on the needle from that cast on row that can make that first row of knitting even tighter. And once you're building a tight row on another tight row, that can be a problem. I also would like to have you get back in touch with me and tell me whether or not your knit row and your purl row are both tight. Because I usually find that people will tend to purl a little bit looser than they tend to knit, because you're wrapping the yarn further around the needle to take it through. In the front, it's going up and around the needle instead of just a little bit over in the back. And so if your purls are looser, then that's something else that we can work on with your knit stitches to be loosened up. To control the way you're doing your purl stitch, try to do your purl stitch or your knit stitch like you do your purl stitch, is to wrap a larger circle. Make your movement larger to wrap it around. Even when you can just bring it around in a little way to make that movement a little bigger, that could be another way to help with tight knitting. And then I have a couple of knitters that I knit with who do the knit and tug method of knitting. So they knit the stitch and then they tug on it. And then they knit the stitch and then they tug on it. And if that works for you to have consistent gauge and to have a good tension, great. But if it's not working for you, number one, it's not very efficient. And number two, it can really make those stitches tight. If you pull the yarn up, it will tighten the knit stitch even more than if you pull the yarn back. So go sit down, do a knit stitch, and pull it up once, and then pull it back once, and see if there's a difference. When you pull it up, you are lifting up the loops from the row below and making the circumference, the distance of the circumference where that piece of yarn has to go, much shorter. So that's another tip to look at, is the way in which you're pulling the stitches from one needle to the next. If you're pulling up with your needle, if you're pulling down, or if you're pulling back with the needle. So a lot of this stuff is stuff that I could look at if you sent me a video of your knitting, and I don't want everybody to send me videos because I'm not an expert in teaching knitting. I mean, I've done it a lot, but I can't always fix everything that everyone's done. But that is the thing that we could talk about, is whether or not I should look at your knitting, or you should have someone else look at your knitting that is in your knitting group or whatever, and see if they could help you diagnose the way in which your knitting stitches work. You want to have less tension in your hands. And then another thing you want to look at is the kind of needles you're using. Some people just knit tighter on metal needles. Nickel needles can make your knitting, you've got more drag, and so they can make your knitting much tighter. And some people knit a lot tighter on bamboo needles. And so if you, or wooden needles, if you are knitting on either one of those, you might want to swap it out and see if that doesn't help you a little bit. And then the last thing is there's a possibility, and this has happened to some people who come back after they've practiced for a couple weeks and beginning knitting, and then they come back, is that they're twisting the stitch. They're physically twisting the stitch. They're knitting through the back loop, or they're purling through the wrong stitch, and they're twisting the stitch on every row, and then perhaps untwisting it on the next row, which is how some people knit. But if that's what you're doing, then, and you might not even know that you're doing that, you might be knitting through the wrong part of the stitch, and twisting the stitch can make it much tighter as well. So there are my thoughts on getting through some tight knitting and seeing if we can help you loosen up a little bit. Because there's nothing more frustrating for me than sitting next to someone and taking their knitting and trying to fix it for them or help them with it, and I can't get into the stitches. And I think, how are you enjoying this? It has to be so painful for you, because I'm irritated in the first 10 seconds, right? I'm thinking, I can't even get my needle in it. It hurts your hands. And so that, I think that's something you could, you know, all knitters should definitely work on, is having, you know, even tension and something that's not too tight. So thank you so much for the question this week. I really appreciate it. And if you have other questions to ask me, just go out to the Ravelry thread. I have a thread open that says ask Cori a question, and I will answer it there for you as best I can, unless I have a 10-minute answer, and then I'll do it on the podcast where I just ramble on and on a little bit. Okay. Show notes. I am doing show notes for the podcast. I don't know that anybody looks at show notes or needs to look at show notes, but if there's something that I've talked about and you had a question, I have them on my Irocknits.com website, and I also have them on Ravelry. Every episode, I just load a thing that says what episode it is and what the title is, and then the first answer, the first reply on that thread are all the show notes and any, links that you might like to things that I've talked about, yarns I've talked about, patterns I've talked about, or just kind of the outline of what I've gone through on that particular podcast. And then you could go back and say, was that on podcast 2 or was that on podcast 1 when she talked about such and such? At least there would be a little bit of an outline there for you to say, oh gosh, that's the one that I wanted to rewatch because I wanted to look at something. So I do have show notes out there for people. Okay, I am wearing the Friendship Road dress today because I was out and about earlier, and I have some leggings and some boots on, and oh gosh, I should show you guys these boots. Okay, I'll take one off if I can real quick. I know some people really hate Instagram ads, but I buy stuff from those Instagram ads. Raise your hand if you've ever bought something from an Instagram ad. They just have you me pegged. Look at these. Oh, they're not quite that bright. Aren't they fun? They're really Cori shoes. Confessions of a Woman Who Shopped. That's my shopping section this week. Went out and bought those. They're super comfortable and really wild. So I have those on with my Friendship Road dress today. It is short sleeved, but it's the one that goes down to just above my knees, and it was knit in the worsted weight instead of the DK weight. And I talked about that at length on a previous podcast. So the sweater today that we are going to talk about is the Hootenanny Hoodie. So let's get this one out here and chat about it a little bit. The Hootenanny Hoodie is a sweater pattern from the book Minnesota 52. And the book is on sale right now for $20 shipped. We have one box left. And I'm doing a retreat coming up that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so I have to take some of the books to that retreat. So if you haven't gotten a book and you still want one, I have a little, the Hootenanny Hoodie is from the book. So here is the Hootenanny Hoodie. Joanna in all of her glory. And that's how we spell Hootenanny. And my little romance description for this. This streamlined hoodie is going to take you everywhere from the local high school football game or bonfire at the lake to a fall fiber festival or casual evening out with friends. Contrasting Latvian braids on the hem, sleeves, and collar are stunning accents to this hooded sweater. Knitted in your favorite team colors or choose colors that are more subdued to fit your personal color palette. This is definitely your go-to knit for the next Hootenanny. And then I have the definition of a Hootenanny is an informal gathering with folk music and sometimes dancing, a gathering at which folk singers entertain, often with the audience joining in. So that's the Hootenanny hoodie from Minnesota 52. I have it in a number of colors today. This purple version is Marigold, and the pink version over here is Blue Moon Fiber Arts Targhee. If you have not knit with, and I think it's pronounced Targhee without the G, but I always say Targhee, Targhee yarn, and it is, let me give you the exact description behind that yarn so that you can know just what it is. The yarn is Blue Moon Fiber Arts Targhee worsted. It's 100% Targhee wool. You get 616 yards in 250 grams. Huge put up, large put up. And the main color was Maroon 5, which is great. And the contrast color is Lauma, Lauma. So it's a cream and pink in that particular one that is pictured in the book. And this one is Marigold Rios in Purple Mystery, I think, and a cream. And then mine, Cori's, is of course done in orange, Marigold Rios in the glazed carrot colorway, and a cream. And the reason that I didn't wear this one today is because I want to talk a little bit about it, and I want to show a detail up close. So I'm going to hold it up to the camera for you. The glazed carrot colorway is a real deep orange. It's absolutely beautiful, and I really like this Rios knit up in this pattern. It's very squishy, soft, really nice. But let's talk briefly about the Latvian braids, which are so much fun to do. So in the book, each chapter, there are 2 designs or 4 designs based on a topic. And this particular topic was chevrons. And so Megan and I found a picture out along the road that had, you people that already have this book are like sick of seeing it and already know this, but there's the sign that we saw along Minnesota 52 that we took a picture of, and then we each designed something with chevrons in it. So Megan designed a cowl and a hat and mittens with chevrons that kind of look like knit stitches and absolutely beautiful. Maybe I'll bring that on the podcast sometime because I have samples in the suitcase in the basement for that. And I designed the hoodie with the chevrons. And a Latvian braid is just a few row stitch pattern where you are working this way and you are doing a purl row, and then you are knitting with the orange and knitting with the cream and knitting with the orange and knitting with the cream. So it is considered color work. And then you come back across the top and you do it the opposite direction. So you bring the white yarn under, and then the orange under, and then the white yarn under, and then the orange under, and then on the next row you bring it over, coming back. So your yarn twists up into a big mess on the way over, but on the way back it untwists. So if you can stand it, not manipulating your skeins the entire way. On the bottom of this sweater you have the Latvian braid, but there's a turning row there. And in order to use up some more of that white yarn, I did stripes for the turning row, which is kind of cute, and also on the cuffs of the sleeves. So if you would perchance roll your sleeve back, you would have this kind of cute cuff detail. I really wanted to knit a hoodie because I think a lot of people live in sweatshirts. I think that's very common these days. And I thought that having a sweater that was really like a sweatshirt, and something you could just throw on wherever you wanted to go, would work really well. The hoodie, however, is knit shorter than a traditional hood would be. Number one, for the weight aspect of it. I didn't want a real heavy hood hanging back there. Number two, I don't think a lot of grown adult women go around town with their hood up. So you're not going to wear the hood as often. And in the picture, in the book, the hood looks too short, and I make a comment about that because see how that picture of Joanna, there's not a lot of extra fabric there at the shoulder. And so I wanted to make sure that the hood was shorter. If you wear your hood all the time, or you want your hood to be longer, you just knit it a few rows longer before you do the Kitchener stitch across the top. No problem. But because you've got a placket and it's open in the front, and you've got a hood, one of the things that can happen to people is that it's pulling back at their neck, and things are going back off the back a little bit because the weight of the hood is so strong. So I wanted to make sure that I had a shorter hood so the weight of the hood would not be an issue. But I also have this detail at the back neck to cause, right there, some stability. I cast off at the neckline and then re-picked back up across those stitches and knit the hood. And that just makes for an absolutely wonderful detail, but it's also kind of a bulky seam. I mean, not bulky, but there's a seam there. And that provides so much stability at the neck that the weight of the sweater and the weight of the hood are not pulling down on the shoulder, onto your back of your shoulders and pulling that hood back there. And I talked about that a little bit on one of the other a couple of podcasts too, where that had happened on another sweater. A lot of times when you're picking up, say, a button band or a neck collar of a sweater, and you're picking it up separately, the reason for that is to provide stability and a place for the weight to hang. It's like, if you think of it as a hanger, it's the thing that the sweater is hanging on. It's hanging on that neck. It's hanging on your shoulders. And if you provide some stability for that, that is more than just stockinette fabric or a hemmed neckline, or a ribbed, neckline, then you've got something for that to hang on to. So the hoodie is mostly stockinette. It's raglan in construction. It's a little bit longer. I would not call it tunic length, but it's definitely not high hip. Of course, you can make your sweater whichever length flatters you the most. And you know what that is. You know whether or not you're pulling on your stuff all day to pull it down longer. If you want to wear it with leggings and you want to cover, your hind end, then you would definitely want to make it longer. But so I'm going to see if I can show you how long this is just by holding it up here. So there we start, and there's the bottom. So it's a longer sweater for purposes of comfort, right? Just having a comfy, cozy hoodie to wear. Do you have to do the Latvian braids? Absolutely not. If that color work or doing a Latvian braid really freaks you out, then don't do it. But I will say that I have a hat and cowl and mitt set in the book that has Latvian braids in it. So if you wanted to try a Latvian braid on, say, a hat that wouldn't be a huge time commitment, you could try it on the hat first and see if it's something that you enjoy doing. I think they're super fun. You feel very accomplished when you do a Latvian braid. It goes kind of contrary to the work. It's just a real, it's a fun stitch to do. And I would highly recommend everybody try even doing a Latvian braid for 10 stitches or so. It really is not difficult, and you have to drop the yarn every time. So you do not have to know how to do color work. You don't have to have yarn in each hand, because you are forced to drop the yarn every time between stitches and pick it back up, because it has to go under the stitch, and you have to drop the yarn to take the next yarn color forward. And so there's no reason that someone who had no experience in color work couldn't do that a little bit. Okay, let's see. what else have I not talked about today? Oh, the knitting retreat. I am teaching in Columbus, Ohio on December 1st. November 30th and December 1st, I'm going to be at the Nationwide Conference and Convention Center with some other folks. So let me tell you, 614 Knit Studio. Go to their website or their blog, and they have all the details out there. And it's an a la carte menu, so you get to sign up for the classes that you want to take. And then there's a one-time fee for some activities that are going to happen on Friday evening. And if you're in the area at all, or even if you're not in the area and you want to fly into a knitting event, it's called the Holiday Stitch Escape. And I am teaching sweaters and shawls. And on Friday night, I am the MC for the Skeins to Skeins game that I have developed to have knitters work together in small groups or teams to kind of have a fun time with knitting trivia and some knitting terminology and things like that. So that it's called Skeins to Skeins because I kind of based it on that apples to apples game where you have a card and then everybody chimes in and picks an answer, and then, it's kind of like that. So it's called Skeins to Skeins. That'll be on Friday night. And then Saturday morning, I'm teaching sweaters. And then Saturday afternoon, I think I'm teaching shawls. I think I have that right. And then Stephanie Alford of Space Cadet Yarns is going to be teaching what you always wanted to know about hand-dyed yarns. Perfect for my topic today on reskating. Be the perfect, so she'll be teaching that. And then Olgajazzy is going to be there, so I'm super excited about that because I've never met her, and she'll be teaching novelty cables. And then Constance Hall is going to be teaching rag rug weaving. So everybody's covered. You've got a little yarn, you've got some cables, you've got some rag rug weaving there on that Saturday, and my sweaters and shawl classes, and that is in Columbus, Ohio at the Nationwide Conference Center. I'm super excited about going. Not so super excited about packing up all the sweaters and shawls and putting them in boxes and shipping them out there. I get so nervous about getting all that stuff there and making sure that it all gets there in one piece. So, but it is, I love teaching at events like that. So that'll be really fun. I also booked a second date with Darn It Anyway here in Minnesota and Stillwater for the sweater class. I am teaching sweaters in November at Darn It Anyway, and she put it up on her Facebook page and did kind of everybody that was followed them on Facebook could have first dibs at registration and the class filled right away for that Saturday. So she has added a second day on Sunday. So I'll come back and teach again on Sunday the sweater workshop. 50 Shades of Sweaters is what it's called. So if you were bummed because it looked like it was full, just know that she has added a second date. I'm also teaching the sweater workshop at All About Yarn in October here, coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you're in the Twin Cities area or just across the border in Wisconsin, there are a couple opportunities for you to get that sweater class that I'm teaching. I have some winners of some yarn to announce, and then I have a giveaway today before I finish up here. So let's talk about the bags of yarn, the sweaters quantities. I don't really have to show these all again, but they're sitting here. So the wool sweaters quantity of the Rowan felted tweed yarn goes to goldenespressoknit. She was number 37. Number 37 was chosen. Her name is Sharon. And so Sharon, get in touch with me on Ravelry and give me your full name and address, and I will ship that out to you. So congratulations on that. And then the navy cotton bag of yarn for the taco sweater goes to Sally from Idaho, number 5. She was number 5 in that feed. And so that one goes to Sally. And then the yellow one, which is just out of my reach there, the yellow cotton sweater for the taco sweater goes to number 20. Knit Takes 2, and that's Michelle. And so if you give me your full name and mailing address, I will get that out to you as well. So those are the 3 sweaters quantities that I had to give away. And then I had, remember the cowl, that falling leaves cowl? And so that's here. And that is going to number 36, Jerry 2. And so I assume her name is Jerry. Jerritoo. So that is the cowl for you. So get in touch with me and I will get those out in the mail as soon as I can, and you guys can all start knitting right away here. I have a big sweaters quantity of yarn to give away today. I was going through my stash the other day and I found this. And I've knit a couple things out of this yarn. It's absolutely luscious. This is called Upside Down. Sometimes I feel like this whole podcast is upside down. Juniper Moon Farm Cumulus. This is Israeli Mako cotton. I have 5 skeins in the marigold colorway. So it's yellow, pretty bright yellow. And if you've ever taken a class from me, especially my shawl class, you know that I think everybody should have a shawl or a cowl knit out of yellow. Because in the spring of the year, when we all get done with all the winter doldrums, there's nothing like wearing something yellow out into the sunshine in the spring. And it lifts your spirits, it lifts everyone's spirits around you. And I know that there are people out there who think that they can't wear yellow, but everyone can wear some shade of yellow. So even if you wear a pale yellow or a golden yellow or a bright yellow, I think that that's wonderful. So if you like yellow and you want some wonderful, oh, so soft, worsted cotton, 5 skeins, and this is 248 yards to 100 grams. So with 5 skeins, we've got well over 1,000 yards here, 1,200 yards, 94% cotton, 6% nylon. It's so nice. Go out to the Ravelry thread and tell a person about my podcast. I've had so many people get in touch since Amber, my dear friend, so kindly commented about my podcast on her last podcast. And she, came back on and said, I'm just going to edit this in to add that Cori has a podcast. So many of you have come over and said, I'm, glad to have found you. And so I would like you to tell a friend about the podcast, just one person. You can tag them on Ravelry or tell them in real life, or just get in touch with someone on Instagram and send them a private message and said, hey, I'm enjoying watching this. And well, don't tell them if you're not enjoying it. If you're not enjoying it, turn it off. Why are you still watching? But if you are enjoying it, tell another person about it. So tag someone or tell someone, and then you can put your name in to win this on. And maybe I'll leave that particular one up for a month. I drew these after 2 weeks because I really wanted people who had been watching from the beginning and started early on to have first chance at those. So I didn't leave them up for a month. I just left them up for 2 weeks. And I know there'll be some people who are disappointed that didn't get a chance to participate in that particular giveaway. But now I've got another one. And I think for the next couple of weeks, I'll have some sweaters quantities to give away too as well. And the last thing that I'm going to share is that I got a couple more of those cowls done. So I thought, okay, I'll show people. So I had to order another button for this one. I got another, and then I got a brown one done. So that's the Holy Cowl by Cynthia Cushing. And these are the Christmas presents that I'm doing for all the women in my life who like me to have knit things for them, but I'm not always going to knit sweaters every year for everyone that I love. So my hero class started at Lakeside Yarn on Friday, and we discussed how many times I had knit that hero sweater. I knitted as a baby, and I knitted as a child size, and then I knit 13 adult sweaters of that hero sweater. And so they got really spoiled that year, and that was 2 years ago. So last year they were probably gravely disappointed that they got cowls. They got knitting at the library cowls. So, and I'll be talking about that in an upcoming podcast. So I just want to thank all of you for your kind comments about this podcast. I've just been thrilled to death to receive such really nice comments and messages about how people are learning things about sweaters, which I just love to teach. I would teach every day if I could. And I had hoped that that's what would come out of this podcast, but your comments on YouTube and some of you coming over to Ravelry and Instagram and making comments have just they just have warmed my heart. I'm not kidding. I told Amber, I said, I have so many new followers because you said something about my podcast today. I said, they're so nice. So if there are any more really nice followers out there, you guys can all follow me because it's just been really fun for me. And until next time, keep it colorful.